They say travel broadens the mind, but for some Americans, it just stretches their patience with the metric system. From mistaking meters for miles to believing 20 degrees Celsius means bring a parka, these hilarious culture clashes prove that confusion truly knows no borders. If you love stories that blend humor, travel, and a bit of friendly international chaos, hit that subscribe button, tap like, and turn on the notification bell, because we've got more laugh-out-loud tales of global misunderstandings coming your way every week. My American boss once took his first business trip to our Toronto office and decided to rent a car to explore a bit. Barely an hour later, he called me in absolute frustration. "This car is garbage!" he shouted. "The gas gauge is broken. It's been stuck on F the whole time. I've been driving for an hour and it hasn't moved. I'm about to run out of gas in the middle of nowhere." I tried not to laugh as I explained that he'd only driven about 80 kilometers, roughly 50 miles, and that the car's tank was still full. He paused for a moment, then muttered, "Well, they should have told me that in American." An American exchange student in my cooking class in Italy once had a meltdown over measurements. The recipe asked for 10 milliliters of olive oil, a tiny amount. He squinted at the measuring cylinder like it was a puzzle from a spy movie, then shrugged and poured in what he called just a splash. The splash turned out to be nearly half a cup. When the sauce turned into a shiny, greasy mess, he slammed the spoon down and declared, "This is why Italian food is so oily. Your measurement system was invented by lunatics." The Italian instructor just sighed and said, "No, we just read the instructions." I used to work at a small clinic in Australia when an American tourist came in for a checkup. The nurse asked him for his weight, and he proudly said, 200 sharp. She nodded, did the quick conversion, and wrote down 90 on his chart. The man glanced over, went pale, and blurted out, 90? I've lost over 100 pounds? Am I dying? Is this a parasite? The poor nurse had to call the doctor, who spent 10 full minutes explaining that kilograms don't make people lighter, they just sound scarier. My American friend once visited Paris and nearly had a breakdown trying to use his GPS. He kept staring at the screen, muttering, "What the hell is 500 meters supposed to mean? Is that like a block or a football field?" After a few failed attempts to eyeball it, he turned the voice navigation off completely and said he'd just use intuition. 10 minutes later, intuition led him straight into a roundabout he'd already passed twice. By the time he found his destination, he looked at me and said, "You people need shorter meters." While riding a high-speed train in Japan, I overheard an American man scoff at the digital speed display. It read 280 kilometers an hour, and he turned to his wife with pride and said, "This isn't even that fast. My brother's Mustang can do 160. The Japanese businessman beside me slowly turned his head, blinking in disbelief. I wanted to tell the man he was traveling at 175 miles per hour, not 160, but his confidence was so pure, I didn't have the heart to ruin it. At a gas station just outside Vancouver, an American tourist was fuming at the price board. $2 for gas? That's robbery! He shouted, shaking his fist at the pump. He didn't realize that the price was per liter and not per gallon, and that the Canadian dollar was weaker. He stormed off, thinking he'd been ripped off, after paying what would be about $5.50 per gallon. Somewhere, a Canadian attendant was probably still laughing. There was an American woman in a UK expat Facebook group who once caused chaos with a simple post. "Help," she wrote, "my oven's broken." I set it to 200 like the recipe said, but it barely got warm, and now my chicken's still raw. Dozens of people jumped in to explain that British ovens use Celsius, not Fahrenheit, and that she'd essentially roasted her bird at nearly 400 degrees Fahrenheit. The comments were split between sympathy and curiosity about whether the chicken survived. It didn't. A tourist from the US once rushed into a doctor's office in Dublin after being told his son's temperature was 39 degrees Celsius. The man went pale and started shouting, "39? That's hypothermia! Get him a blanket, he's freezing!" The doctor had to gently stop him before he wrapped his feverish child in a coat. When he explained that 39 degrees Celsius meant a high fever, not frostbite, the father looked mortified and said, "Right, Celsius, yeah, we don't really do that back home." My American manager once tried to impress our German office by saying, "Yeah, I'm running a 10K race this weekend. That's what, maybe 2 miles? 3 tops?" You could hear the silence echo. Every German engineer in the room slowly turned to look at him like he'd just admitted to not knowing what gravity was. No one corrected him. They just let him live in blissful ignorance until race day. He didn't finish smiling. I once saw an American at an Australian pub getting irritated over beer sizes. The bartender asked, "Pint or schooner?" And the man frowned. "How many ounces is a pint here?" The bartender hesitated, unsure of the exact conversion. The man threw up his hands, exclaiming, "You don't even know what you're selling? Just give me the biggest one you've got." He ended up with a jug meant for sharing and drank it solo, just to prove a point. On a flight to France, I was seated next to an American who fancied himself a seasoned pilot. When the captain announced our cruising altitude was 10,000 meters, he scoffed. 10,000? That's barely off the ground. Amateur move. He spent the entire flight glancing nervously out the window, muttering about sloppy flying. He had no clue we were actually 33,000 feet in the air. I didn't correct him. His overconfidence was too entertaining. At a swimming pool in Mexico, I saw an American mother refusing to let her kids jump in because the sign said 1.5 meters. She gasped, 15 meters? That's 50 feet deep. Absolutely not. Her husband tried to explain it was just 1.5 meters, but she wasn't convinced. In other countries, commas are periods. It's 15, she insisted, clutching her kids' towels like a shield. The lifeguard eventually stepped in to clarify, and she sheepishly let them swim, in waist-deep water. My friend from Texas once helped me assemble an IKEA bookshelf. He squinted at the instructions and said, "It says here I need a 10mm wrench. I've got plenty of tools, but they're all in inches. You'd think screws were universal." 10 minutes later, he slammed the wrench down and declared, "This is anti-American." I had to explain what millimeters were, but he was already muttering something about metric conspiracies. My cousin from Arizona once visited me in Germany during a summer heat wave. He looked at the weather forecast on his phone, which read 35 degrees Celsius, and immediately started unpacking sweaters and a winter jacket. "You didn't tell me it was freezing here," he said, shivering dramatically. "It's only 35 degrees. I nearly choked trying to explain that 35 degrees Celsius meant about 95 degrees Fahrenheit, that it was, in fact, dangerously hot. He didn't believe me until we stepped outside and the heat hit him like an oven door. He didn't wear that sweater again. I once saw an American tourist in a London fabric shop confidently ask the clerk for 3 yards of cloth. The clerk, holding a meter stick, politely asked, "How many meters would that be, miss?" The woman huffed in disbelief. "I don't know. I'm not a mathematician. A yard is a yard. It's universal." She then tried to demonstrate the length by stretching her arms wide, nearly toppling over a display of buttons. The clerk smiled politely and said, "Very good, madam. I believe that's roughly a meter and a bit," and quietly cut the fabric before any more casualties occurred. I once witnessed an American arguing furiously with a rental car agent in France. He pointed at the odometer, fuming. "This car's been driven 80,000 miles already. The website said 50,000. You're ripping me off." The French agent, visibly trying to stay calm, explained in broken English, "Monsieur, that's kilometers, not miles." But the American wasn't convinced. "Nice try, buddy. Numbers don't lie." He marched out, demanding a proper American car, leaving the poor agent staring blankly, probably questioning his career choices. My American roommate in Berlin once came running out of the bathroom, shouting with excitement, "This new European scale is magic! I've lost almost 100 pounds overnight!" He was flexing in the mirror, convinced that German air had somehow shredded him into shape. I glanced at the scale and noticed it was set to kilograms. His supposed 180-pound frame now read as 82, and he took it as divine intervention. When I told him the truth, he stared in silence, looked down at his stomach, and said, "Well, maybe I'll just keep pretending." At a cafe in Italy, I watched an American tourist argue passionately with the barista about the temperature of his iced coffee. He kept insisting that it wasn't cold enough, while the barista tried to explain in broken English that Caffè Freddo was chilled but not filled with ice cubes like in the US. The man looked betrayed, staring into the cup like it had ruined his entire trip. "Eventually," he muttered, "you people have no idea what iced means," before stomping off toward the nearest McDonald's in search of real coffee. While visiting a museum in Greece, I overheard an American father explaining the distances of ancient Olympic races to his children. "It says the race was 192 meters, he said proudly, "so that's like half a mile?" His daughter frowned, whispering, "Dad, that sounds wrong." The guide, trying not to laugh, gently informed him that 192 meters was barely 600 feet. The father chuckled nervously and said, Right, metric stuff, just testing you kids." They didn't believe him for a second. In a London supermarket, an American couple stood in front of the dairy aisle, completely baffled. "This says milk, but it's in liters. How do we know how much that is?" the husband whispered. The wife squinted at the label and replied, "Let's just grab 2. That should be a gallon, right?" Spoiler alert, it wasn't. They ended up with half as much milk as they needed, and when their tea came out weak and watery, they blamed the British tiny milk system. At a hardware store in Scotland, an American man was trying to buy lumber for a DIY project. He asked the employee for a 2x4, and the worker replied that planks here were measured in millimeters. "Millimeters?" the man repeated, like it was a foreign language. The employee nodded and offered a tape measure. The American sighed, "I just wanted some wood, not a math lesson," and left muttering something about the empire striking back. At a theme park in Spain, an American dad was trying to tell his kids how tall they needed to be for a roller coaster. He stared at it for a full minute, then guessed, "That's probably like, 4 feet?" His son shrugged and said, "I think that's shorter." Instead of checking, the dad confidently said, "You're fine," and marched the kid to the gate. The ride attendant politely turned them away. The dad looked stunned, whispering, "I swear I did the math." Once, while backpacking through Switzerland, I met an American guy at a hostel who was bragging about hiking a 5-mile trail that was actually labeled as 8 kilometers. He claimed he finished in record time, even beating locals. A Swiss girl asked, "You mean 8 kilometers in under 30 minutes?" And he nodded proudly. The entire table went silent. Then someone muttered, "That's Olympic-level running." The poor guy slowly realized he'd mixed up the units. His record time turned out to be not so record-breaking. In Ireland, I watched an American tourist lose his mind over the weather report on TV. The anchor said, "Tomorrow's high will be 20 degrees." And the man shouted, "That's freezing! Why does everyone look so calm?" He rushed to buy a thick winter coat, gloves, and a scarf, only to step outside the next day into a warm, sunny afternoon. Locals were in t-shirts. He walked past them sweating buckets, refusing to admit he'd misunderstood Celsius. I once witnessed an American woman in France order a steak well done at a fancy Paris restaurant. When it arrived medium at best, she flagged the waiter and said, "This isn't cooked." The waiter blinked, slightly offended, and said, "Madame, the chef will be insulted if we cook the meat anymore." She sighed dramatically, whispering to her husband, "They act like there is sacred here." The waiter returned 5 minutes later, proud of the extra-cooked version. It was basically charcoal. Justice was poetic. During a cooking class in Thailand, an American man nearly fainted trying to convert all the measurements. A teaspoon? Tablespoon? Milliliters? Grams? Why can't it all just be? He grumbled. The instructor smiled patiently, explaining each one. Halfway through, he sighed and said, "Okay, 1 milliliter equals ounce?" The class collectively groaned. By the end, his curry was both too salty and too spicy, and he proudly declared, "Nailed it, American style." At an airport in Germany, an American woman was filling out her customs form. When it asked for her height in centimeters, she froze. "Centimeters?" she whispered. After a few seconds, she pulled out her phone and Googled, "How many centimeters in a person?" The search result confused her more. Eventually, she wrote 5'7" centimeters. The officer at passport control looked at it, then back at her, and just sighed deeply before stamping it through. He didn't even bother correcting it. Sometimes mercy is faster than math. While hiking in Canada, I saw an American family at the base of a trail leading to a waterfall. The sign clearly said 3 kilometers loop. The dad laughed and said, 3 kilometers? That's nothing, 20 minutes tops. An hour and a half later, I spotted the same family dragging their feet back to the parking lot, drenched in sweat and regret. The father muttered, "That was the longest 3 kilometers of my life. They must use extra long kilometers up here." His wife didn't say a word, just glared at him with the silent fury of someone who told him to bring more water. At a gym in Spain, an American guy tried to show off by loading up the barbell with plates that said 25. He looked around, smirked, and yelled, "225, baby! Lightweight!" Then he tried to lift it, and the bar didn't even twitch. He'd unknowingly stacked 25-kilogram plates instead of pounds, which meant he was attempting to bench over 300 pounds. A few Spaniards tried not to laugh as he blamed the European gravity, saying, "It's heavier here, man." An American tourist in a cafe in Rome was outraged when his espresso arrived. He held up the tiny cup and said, "This is it? I ordered a double shot. This is barely enough to wet a straw." The barista, unfazed, explained that it was 60 milliliters, standard for a double. The tourist wasn't having it. "That's a scam. In America, this would be at least 4 ounces. You're charging me full price for half a sip." The barista just smiled and said, "Yes, sir, welcome to Italy," before walking off to serve someone who actually appreciated the coffee.